This is my book review of American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. So I was inspired to kind of read this book after watching the movie. And just a kind of disclaimer, I was very surprised. This book is very, very graphic. So I almost felt like they should have a rating on it because it's very kind of disturbing. But I think it actually has a lot of good insight, and it's very similar to another book I reviewed, which was The Stranger by Albert Camus, right? So, like, there's a lot of hidden kind of existential kind of questions that are within this, right? So the whole story is there's this guy who's like a successful Wall Street person. He's like 27. He has this really big obsession with his appearance. He spends a lot of time on it. He knows every single clothing brand there is that's high end. He knows every single piece of clothing that's produced. He knows how to recognize it. He knows how to name it. He knows how to design outfits. He knows how to analyze outfits. He talks only about outfits with his friends. He only talks about, what people wear, who are doing what. Like, there's just such a superficial aspect to it. And to be honest, like, it's kind of a long book in the sense it's almost like 400 pages. And you just have these like paragraphs filled of him just describing what every single person he sees is wearing to the T, talking about, their coat, their suit, their dress, their shoes, their belts, everything, and just like naming it by brand, naming the color. And so you have this really, really, almost like just erratic attention being paid to like what people are wearing, right? So you have this superficial layer that's just really, really highlighted. And I think that like from watching the movie, I think you get a very different message from the book. The book, I think, really highlights a lot of the problems. And I think it's a really big call, or just like a kind of insult in a sense to the idea of like Western hyper-capitalism, where you have these people on Wall Street who make insane amounts of money, right? Who are not satisfied just because they're comparing themselves constantly with each other. And in a sense, right, they seem to have like no soul, right? Because like this is really the main character, right? He's going around kind of killing people and like torturing people and doing all sorts of terrible things. And you just notice that he's in a very just doesn't like feel anything, right? He doesn't have much emotion. And whenever he, starts to feel something, starts to diverge, he just wants to be a perfect mask. He wants to perfectly fit in. There's so many times when people in the book mistake each other for other people. And it's just kind of highlighting like everybody's just so similar in the fact that like they all get massages, they all get facials, they all do their hair the same way, they all wear like very similar products, they all wear very similar clothes, they all dress very similar, they work at similar firms. So it's like they're almost indistinguishable from each other, to the point where people are just mistaking people for each other because they're like, presumably all white and all get tans, they all like look very similar. And yeah, as a result, it's like he even like it seems so it's very difficult to say if he actually like kills somebody or not, and if it's just in his head, right? But he's a very kind of bothered person in the sense that there's nothing really going on in his head that's human, right? He has this severe detachment with reality, and he gives in completely to his passions, and they kind of overcome him. And that leads him into this kind of life of what you could easily call extreme degeneracy, right? And it's like also that's the problem. Like nobody's relationship is fixed. Like even though they're people dating each other, like everybody is sleeping with everybody, and he knows that somebody he's with is having an affair with somebody else, but he doesn't really care because he doesn't really feel anything towards them. So I think it's a very shocking book in the sense that a large majority of the book is like lulling you to sleep with these like boring details about like what people are wearing. And then also there's like these huge like chapters, like 3 pages, maybe 4 or 5 pages just dedicated towards like an intense analysis of a random like artist like for music. And he goes on and on and on about their first song and then their second song and then why they made their second song. It does an analysis of the song and how it's unique. And so it's really weird because it just like comes in out of nowhere. And then we have these other chapters where he's just, kind of killing people and doing all these, terrible, terrible things. I think the crazy thing is when you see the movie, you think that, oh, the movie must have been like a, exaggeration of the book to make it more Hollywood-like. But then you realize the movie is actually a very muted, dumbed down version of the book because the book itself is just definitely something else. But I think it's really profound in that, like, this idea of basing your entire existence off of like something so superficial that there is nothing internal. There's nothing unique about him. He doesn't deviate from anybody. He only cares what other people think. He looks only in the newspapers about like the reviews of restaurants and only goes to those restaurants. He tries so hard to get a reservation at the best restaurant, and he values pretty much his entire self-worth on just getting that kind of status that goes around like being at the best restaurant and getting those reservations, which are really difficult to get. And like, you just see his life is just a repeat every single day. Like, because we're not really seeing much of his work day. So you just see him like wake up, he works out really hard, but it's all for like vanity in the sense that he just wants to seem perfect. He wants his abs to be perfect. He wants him to be amazingly like a just amazing like specimen. He, is trying to get himself tan and all this stuff. So he's just perfect. He's always concerned about his hair excessively. And he has these points of just huge anxiety attacks. He's on a ton of like anxiety medication. So he's just like a nervous wreck, right? And then, but we never get an insight of to like what he actually feels, right? And like he goes on these like killing sprees and he doesn't really ever reflect on them, right? He just kind of compartmentalizes it and then moves on. And so we have this like shell of a person, which I think can represent, if you have the main character of Patrick Bateman as a mirror towards society, and it's like a mirror that's holding back and just reflecting whatever society is, we can realize that this is just reflecting all the values that are in a sense being pushed by like what we could call late stage capitalism, right? The idea that, oh, if you just make a bunch of money and you spend a bunch of money on a bunch of designer stuff and you focus on how much you paid for these things, you paid excessive amounts, that should impress people, right? And it's like, he's even talking to some girls and like, they don't even want to go on a date with him until he mentions that he can get a like table at Dorsia, which is the most expensive, hardest place to get kind of restaurant. But he even lies about that. And then he can't even get a like reservation. He tries to say that he can, and he makes calls and all sorts of things. So it's just all over the place. And then the really shocking thing is the one girl who like truly like loves him and he actually feels something. And I'm not saying he feels love for her, but he feels this weird stirring feeling because he's just been so like cold-heartedly removed from himself that it just feels so abnormal to him, is his like secretary and like kind of assistant at work. And she's a very, very like sweet like girl, and she's just, like adores him and stuff. And he all of a sudden starts to consider like kind of a different life of like, he starts to actually feel something in there. And he just like feels very weird about that. He's just like, what is that? Because he's just been so like inhuman for so long. And I really think that like this is a problem in society. It's like when we elevate having money, or at least it's not even about having money, it's just chasing money constantly. And we say that that's going to bring us happiness, and we say that that's going to be the solution to the life problems, and we say that this is an existence, because there is nothing truly meaningful that he does, right? You can talk about like, oh, he moves money around, right? But like as a Wall Street job, we all know there's no impact in that, right? There's no like true real world kind of impact. You're just making money, right? So if we talk about you're just making money, then you're just spending a bunch of that money on like a bunch of designer stuff, right? And what is that doing to appease other people? And then you're talking about appearances all day long. And then you're trying to go to like these restaurants just so you can improve appearances. Your relationships are mainly just like lust driven, and it's just a physical kind of thing, and you don't actually love anybody, and nobody loves you back either besides this one secretary, right? There's like, he's with hundreds and hundreds of probably women, and like none of them love each other, and it's just all just like physical. So I think this really reminds me of The Stranger, because in the book, the novel The Stranger, right, he has this really like weird detachment. And even in this book, actually in American Psycho, he even says at one point, you can get accustomed to anything. And this really reminds me of the line from The Stranger where it's like, you can kind of get used to or adjusted to any situation. And so it just represents a full and utter detachment from just any sort of reflection, any sort of feeling, any sort of kind of just being in the moment and trying to enjoy things, trying to reflect some sort of human desire, trying to chase what is love, right? In The Stranger, this girl keeps asking to marry him, and he's like, sure, if you want me to or not. And then in this case, when Jean is talking with him, which is his secretary, right, at a dinner, and she's like, saying like, I really want to tell you something. And she's like, I love you very much. And then he just pretty much doesn't say anything. Like, he just makes up all these random other excuses. He talks about other stuff. And then he says, well, you should never trust appearances. And she argues with him. She's like, no, I'm fine trusting appearances and things. And so it's like really a replay, I think, of The Stranger, in the sense that like this is just a modern version of it, right? The Stranger was written like I don't know how long ago, but this is like a almost 21st century version of that. And I think that we have to be very careful, because a lot of times society, like, you know, demonizes the poor and adores the rich in some cases, or at least adores those who make money, right? A lot of people worship these billionaires, but like the truth is that just ends up creating more people like, Patrick Bateman. Maybe they're not as extreme in like, killing people and stuff, but they're equally soulless. And it's very easy to, sometimes prioritize something that you think is so important and just decide to cut off your human instinct, cut off your human emotion, and use that as some sort of excuse because, oh, I need to make money, I need to do this, or I need to accomplish something, so I need to become emotionless. And I think that's a very scary point, because you just become a concept. You become a blank image. You become a shell of a person. And there's nothing underneath the exterior. And I think that is the thing that we have to be most careful about today, because that's really where a lot of the values and kind of direction is pushing a lot of people, right? When you're in this like culture that's always pushing, advertisements to you to constantly consume in every single way, right? He's consuming, whether it be through lust, whether it be through money, whether it be through comparison, in all these different ways. He's just the ideal hyper consumer, right? That we can think of in America, of buying everything, indulging in everything. And it's almost like he has no ability to like control himself. He's also on like an insane amount of like drugs, and he's doing cocaine and all this stuff. And it's like he has an inability to kind of control himself for some higher reason, or he doesn't even try to. And, he does these just like terrible things. He has no sense of humanity. He like abuses poor people and who are just like begging and not doing anything at all. And so you just see this complete and utter severance from the very thing that makes them human. And you can see that this just makes him into an emotionless robot who becomes so cut off from others that even when somebody who truly loves him, professes their love, he doesn't feel anything. And even when she kisses him, he doesn't even like feel anything either. And he's just a detached object. So I think overall this book was really eye-opening, in the sense like I didn't think it was going to resonate as much with me. In the sense, in like kind of being a reflection of like Western culture and stuff, and hyper consumer like kind of nature. Really interesting thing is the author who wrote this he did actual research on like what people on Wall Street who were bankers and working investment firms and stuff. And so it's really interesting because he just has so many details about like these designer brands, and it's like so weird in a sense of like very unusual, and it just shows that like somebody has put so much effort kind of in the wrong direction, and things that we can say like don't really matter, right? Because you're so worried about the appearances of stuff. But how do I say this? It's like gilded, right? Gilded is when you have some piece of like a table or just like a piece of an object that is covered in gold, but it's not actually made of gold. And inside may be like a rotten core, but on the outside looks shiny. And that's exactly what Patrick Bateman is. On the outside, he's a handsome, tall, fit, rich person. But on the inside, he's rotten to the core. And the question is, what happened and how did that happen, right? And I think we have to be careful that something similar doesn't happen to us, because without people kind of, emphasizing how important it is to have human emotions, to connect with other people, to stick to those things that keep you human, it's very easy for these levels of insane comparison, ambition to just overtake us and reduce us to things that are just, non-human and are just simply robotic animals. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. Otherwise, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.